people ask, is there a spiritual approach to all this? And what I shared with people, what I teach as far as a spiritual approach is not different from what I teach about any stressful time that we're having. I'll give the outline of this to you and I can expand on it at another time. I call this it's a visual guided meditation that I call the temple, the field, and the fence. So the fence, I think of as a kind of a magic fence. And when there's stressful, negative things in the outside world, they can get right through this fence. They can come into the field, which I call the field of consciousness, and even get into our sacred center. So the first thing we have to do is learn how to manage what comes into the conscious mind. So of course, so what we're going through here is it's really scary. We're sick of people trying to kill us over here. We just had a siren go off in the middle of the night, and my phone said uh, South Tel Aviv, Jaffa. Well, I live in South Tel Aviv, not far from Jaffa. We heard interceptions above our building. Our building shook, and we realized if this had been one of those moments when the 5-10% that get through got through, it could have been here. So although the air defenses are very good, and it's not hermetic, and so everybody here goes around with a sense of well, this could be my time. So we've got to put that on the outside of the fence. We can't be obsessed by it. So on the inside of the fence is what I call my world of values and virtues and things that I love and cultivate. And I think one thing we really realize is we have to be here for each other. Um, so people that I talk to, there's a shared sense. We don't talk about it very much, but there's a strong sense of people be willing to help each other, which is usually here in Israel, but a little more uh, uh, um, in focus at this time. Um, and certainly I think for me, I don't talk about my fear to my family. I think sometimes they're looking at me about whether we should fear, and I say, from a rational mathematical perspective, objectively speaking, we're very safe. So our feelings far over exaggerate the likelihood of something bad to happen. Not that something bad couldn't happen, but objectively, rationally, mathematically, we're probably going to be okay. So another thing that Mirab and I did, the streets are kind of empty because these alarms go off several times a day. And if you're outside, it's not always easy to find a reinforced room or a bomb shelter. So we looked outside, the streets are deserted. So we decided we're going to go shopping. And some shops are open. These shopkeepers can either sit at home or sit in their shop. And they were really happy to see us. And there was a few people around. We bought things we didn't need. And we just wanted the shopkeepers to say, we're out. We're not going to be trapped in our homes because of this fear. May Rob and I went and found a few of the local bomb shelters and made sure they're all open. And then we spent a couple hours outside, both on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Now, it's about half the traffic as usual, but half of the people are out there making sure to spend their Wednesday, Thursdays, and especially Friday afternoons at the Fridays at the Shuk Levinsky, the local area where people buy their Shabbos goods. So that you might say is in my field, the values that I stand for, and especially being resilient and being part of Israeli society where we all need to see each other. And the temple is where my deepest core self is found. I connect into the world of spirit, into the world of soul. And if you don't spend time in your temple, you can get lost. You can't protect your field. Everything from the outer fence gets in. We feel miserable. We feel afraid. We get angry. We get resentful. So all that is coming, as it were, from the outside. Even internal disruptions, in a way, are outside the fence. So part of what I do from my temple, where I connect to the world of spirit, the world of soul, and sometimes I just in my mind I'm just standing there soaking everything in. Um, I'm managing the fence. It's like a it's like Venetian blinds. If it's negative, I close it. If it's positive, I open it. I have to deal with what's on the other side of the fence, but not let what's on the other side of the fence come in and um, make toxic the field of consciousness that I'm cultivating, and certainly not get into my holy temple. So I have this conversation with when we've had soldiers over for Shabbat, and sometimes they say they're a spiritual response, and I say to all of them, you got to connect with your core identity. Um, there's fear, there's disruption of life, and just this meditation of who am I as a person? What do I stand for? What do I honor? What are my deepest beliefs? We don't only live in the outside world, we have an inner life, but if we don't pay attention to it, it can be overwhelmed by what's going on the outside. So we all have to spend time in the temple. We also have to cultivate our fields very carefully because things can come into our fields of consciousness. And again, they might create little small toxic dumps inside our field. And it really, really affects our inner life. So you've got to make sure that your field is fertile and pruned and taken care of. And you've got to manage what I call the fence with its kind of ventilation system. Things outside the fence you got to take care of, but you don't want them getting too far in the field. In a way, I'm saying I manage what's on the other side of my fence from my field of consciousness. So whatever's going on out there, I've got to come at it from my values, from honor, dignity, resilience, from my place of values. And then again, as I observe my inner life and outside world, I have to make sure to open it to the love and the beauty, and then make sure that it closes up when there are things that are going to throw me off my spiritual center. So I'm not separating myself from the world. I'm just very careful about what gets into my consciousness, because when these things intrude into the field in the temple, that's what I think causes, real uh, severe inner dysregulation and even depression and neurotic attachment to anger, anxiety, etc. So something I've been teaching anybody who asks me. They say, well, you're a rabbi, what's the spiritual approach? And I don't say trust in God because I'm a Iranian Kabbalist. We live in a broken world. But what I can do is manage what happens inside of me. So put that aside. Um, I want to get to a few fundamentals that I find that I repeat to people. I'll just give you an example. I have a Facebook friend from high school, and he said, "Why don't those people over there just stop? Every time I read, there's always a war and people are killing each other, and why just they can't they just get along with each other?" And I thought to myself, um, my friend is completely historically ignorant. It's kind of an American approach that there's always a truth in the middle. There's always some kind of compromise so we can stop things. This is a very rational approach to problem solving. The truth's in the middle. Let's just all calm down. And they really don't have a grasp of what's happening. In fact, if you are a person who has never met ideological haters or has never been one, we truly don't understand the power of ideological hatred. So I have to remind them just of a few things. I'll remind you now. First of all, we always have to remember that Palestine is a region like the Rocky Mountains, the Western United States. It comes from the Plishtim or the Philistines that we see in the Bible. It probably described the coastal region. It was part of the land of Canaan when the Israelites came into Canaan. Remember, they set up a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom, but in the land of Canaan. That's what the land was called before the Israelites came in, and it became the kingdom of Israel and ultimately the kingdom of Judea. And then, of course, with the Babylonian exile, it was Judea. But before that, it was Canaan. Now, there are some evidence from the Greek period that the coastal region was known as a Peleshit or Philistia, probably because of the what are called the Plishtim, which were probably the sea people. So if you want to look up the origin of the Plishtim, the sea people, just type that in, the sea people in the Bible. And they inhabited the area that we would call Gaza today. I think there are 5 or 6 Philistine cities. So it was a region, but the people were not called Palestinian. They were called, whatever their ethnic group was. And the area was not called Palestine until the Romans conquered and Judea and exiled the Jews in around 135 CE because they wanted to wipe any vestige of Jewish identity from the land. The Romans renamed it Palestine. That's in the about the 130s CE. It was a geographic district. It wasn't, it was not aimed after an ethnic group because the ethnic group was the Jews or the Judeans. Um, Under the Roman Empire, of course, the Roman Empire split into the Western Empire and the Eastern Empire, we call the Byzantine Empire. And again, Palestine was a regional district. You can do a Google search of maps of Palestine, and you can see the different districts in the Byzantine Empire. So it was like a province, and provinces, of course, had to have dividing lines and different kinds of jurisdictions for tax purposes. It was simply a province for the purposes of the managing an empire. When Byzantine Palestine was conquered by the Arabs in the late 600s CE, the name stayed. And remember, the indigenous population by this point was relatively few Jews. The native languages were Greek and Aramaic, and it was Christian. So the question is, how long did it take for Christian Byzantine Palestine to become Muslim Arabic speaking Palestine? You can look this up. It took a few hundred years. How did that happen? Because Arabs from Arabia sent troops there to colonize the area. They moved into the area. It took a few hundred years for the local population to convert from Christianity to Islam and for Arabic to be the language of the area. So, I mean, one thing we can say, if you're anti-colonialist, well, if you want to go back to it, who are the colonizers of Palestine? It was Arabs from the Arabia. That should be kind of obvious. The native language of Palestine, Canaanite, was long gone. The next native language, which would have been Hebrew, again, was gone. And so what you have left is Greek, which was the language of the Byzantine Empire, and Aramaic. Okay, we fast forward. So this region called Palestine, like the Rocky Mountains, it's just a region, is not named after an indigenous population. By the way, nobody contests this. You can look it up. I mean, meaning I only want to share facts with you, and I think facts speak the truth. These are objective facts known to any person who knows their history. The Ottomans defeated the Arabian empires, and the Ottomans took it over. And you could look at Ottoman maps of Palestine, and again, it was a district. There was the Damascus district, the Jerusalem district, an area called Palestine, and the districts changed through history. So the name of the region, Palestine, the area that the word Palestine covered, shifted through history. Now, all the way up until the First World War, of course, the British and the French defeated the Ottoman Empire, and the British and the French divided up the parts of the empire that they are going to occupy by the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and that's when lines were drawn. Palestine included what is today Israel and Transjordan. They cut off Jordan, I think in 1922 or something, to leave what we would call today is Israel Palestine. To not try not to be contentious here, but the area was called Palestine. Now remember, not after Palestinians. It was a name inherited from the Romans, from the Byzantine, that just stayed in use. When the British took it over, of course, they had a mandate to govern it. And by this time, there was a Jewish population, by the way, who were permitted to live there by the Ottoman Turks. There was an indigenous Jewish population. There was immigration under the Turks and under the British. No land was stolen. It was legal immigration under the Ottoman Turks and under the British. There's no evidence that any land owned by Arabs living in Palestine was stolen by Jews living in Palestine. It's the idea of that they stole the land. It just doesn't have any historical credibility. It's a polemical term, not an historical term. Now, when the British say that we're pulling out of the mandate of Palestine, by the way, I mean the British raised a regiment in World War II to fight in their army. It's called the Palestine Regiment. About two-thirds Jews, about one-third Arabs, but they formed a regiment. There was two Jewish battalions, one Arab battalion, and they fought under the British. So everything was Palestine. The Jerusalem Post was called the Palestine Post. Look at Miss Palestine, 1939. You'll see a very clearly Eastern European Jewish woman. So, and the Jews called themselves Palestinians, meaning they lived in a region called Palestine, although they were Jews. So we had Jewish Palestinians and Arab Palestinians, meaning lived in the region called Palestine. At the end of the British Mandate, they realized they needed to divide the land between Jewish Palestinians and Arab Palestinians. They were all called Palestinians, meaning living in the region called Palestine. When the mandate ended and the land was divided, the Yishuv, the Jewish uh, organized community in Palestine, proclaimed their area, meaning the area of Palestine given to the Jews, state of Israel. But I want you to think for a minute, the state of Israel, geographically, no one talks about this, but the state of Israel is in Palestine. So sometimes when I say the state of Israel in Palestine, to remind people it's a region, like the Rocky Mountains, Western United States. So the Jews named their state Israel when they divided the region called Palestine. The Arabs did not accept the division, so they never named their area. So the indigenous army that tried to fight the Jewish state, they called it the Arab Liberation Army. They didn't call it the Palestine Liberation Army. They called it the Arab Liberation Army because they wanted all of Palestine only to be Arab, meaning that the Jews had to be either killed or pushed out. So the 1948 war that Israel calls the War of Independence is better understood as the Palestine Civil War. Palestine Civil War between the Jews of Palestine and the Arabs of Palestine, and the war was a war over land. Who was going to rule the most land? When the land was divided, the Jews of Palestine accepted their part. From the Arab side, they thought that the UN dividing Palestine into two areas, Jewish and Arab, was completely illegitimate, and therefore they did not accept the partition. And from their perspective, what the UN did was completely illegitimate. No Arab state voted for it. There was enough of the UN that voted for it, including, by the way, the United States and the Soviet Union, that the mandate ended in these two states. By the end of the 1948 Palestine Civil War, there was the Jewish Palestine called Israel, Arab Palestine, which should have become a state at that point, meaning the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The West Bank was occupied by Jordan, the Gaza Strip by Egypt. You would think that Jordan and Egypt would pull out and create a Palestinian state on the West Bank and Gaza. They didn't, for a couple of reasons. If they would have created a Palestinian state, it would be some kind of de facto recognition that there was a Jewish state. And they said, no Arab state in Palestine until the Jewish state is destroyed. So one thing you'll see is that the War of 1948 never really ended, meaning, will the Jews be permitted to have a political entity in Palestine? Right? So the answer up until the late 1960s was absolutely not. The Jewish state must be destroyed. It's entirely illegitimate from the Arab perspective. This, of course, was one of the causes of the 1967 war, where the rhetoric, you can look this up, the rhetoric was, we're going to finally destroy the state of Israel, kill all the Jews and push them into the sea. Just go watch the newsreels of the 1967 war. The goal was to destroy the state of Israel, kill the Jews, push them into the sea. As you know, Israel struck first against the Egyptians, the Syrians, and the Jordanians. Israel pleaded with the Jordanians not to enter into the war. They did. And to the astonishment of Israelis and the Arabs and the world, Israel won the 6 Days War and came into possession of the West Bank, Golan Heights, and Sinai. By the way, in 1948, people called the Palestine refugee crisis. When you ask yourself in this war over the land, if you look at the documents around the division of the land, the British somewhat assumed that Jews who entered into the Arab sector would move to the Jewish sector, and Arabs in the Jewish sector would move to the Arab sector. Okay? You'll see that there was an expectation that this would happen. So as the war progressed, Arabs that were in the Jewish sector fled. Some say they were pushed, and indeed some villages were pushed because it was a war over land. Although it was in the official policy of the IDF, certainly local commanders said, we've got to clear out this village. If we leave them behind us, they're hostile. They're our regular military force behind us. They can ambush us. We just got to move this village out of here. That happened. As when the Arab side conquered any Jewish settlements, they conquered a few. The settlement was destroyed. The Jews were put in prison camps. So when either side conquered a village of the other side, every Jewish conquered village, as far as I know, the Jews were put as prisoners of war. Most Arabs were not expelled. They left out of fear. They're also encouraged by the incoming army. The incoming army said, "Get out, so we have freedom of movement to fight Israel. You'll come back once we defeat Israel." So they left out of fear. They were encouraged to leave, and some indeed were expelled. But where did they go? If they went to Gaza, they were still in Palestine. If they went to the West Bank, they were still in Palestine. They didn't leave Palestine. They went to a different part of Palestine. I want you to think about this. When people say Palestinian refugees, where were the refugees living? In Palestine. So they weren't refugees from Palestine. They were Palestinian refugees in Palestine. So where did they want to go? They wanted to go home to their original villages. And there was some question, would Israel allow those who left their villages to go back to their original villages? There was some pressure on Israel. And Israel finally agreed. UN Resolution 131, where Israel agreed that in return for recognition, the Arabs who had left their homes could come back. So look at UN Resolution 131. Every Arab state voted against the resolution that would have allowed the Arabs of Palestine who left their homes to come back. Now, again, this is a fact. I'm not using this for rhetoric. It's simply a fact. From their perspective, Israel could not be recognized. It's something very deeply ingrained in Muslim consciousness. The Jews were foreign colonialist interlopers, destroying Arab culture, a completely foreign plant, placed in the Arab garden. It had to be extirpated. So to agree to Resolution 131, they would have had to agree that Israel was legitimate. So they voted against the resolution, which would have had the Arabs who left their homes in Palestine go back. So what do we have now? We have Jewish Palestine called Israel. You have Arab Palestine that didn't yet have a name. It was simply Arabs who lived in Palestine. Now, by the 1960s, the Palestine Liberation Organization came to be. And it's really not until the 1950s, 60s that the idea that there's an Arab identity in Palestine called the Palestinians. Again, I believe this is historically correct. You can go look at it. It was the Arab Liberation Army that fought against the state of Israel, not the Palestine Liberation Army. And the Palestine Liberation Organization was founded. So a few things about liberation politics. You may know that the Chinese army is called the People's Liberation Army. In Vietnam, it was called the Liberation Army. In Algeria, it was called a Liberation Armies. Liberation armies were built on something of a neo-Marxist idea, anti-colonialist idea, that when Westerners move into an area of an indigenous population, their mere presence there is an act of aggression. And therefore, they should be killed, men, women, and children. And not just killed, but slaughtered. What happened on October 7th was shocking, but it was not unprecedented. I mean, if you look at the Algerian Revolution against the French, the butchery was widespread. If you look at the Chinese Revolution, again, the constant butchery. By the way, I mean, throughout the Middle Ages, the idea that you would fight a war and not butcher the enemy was rather a new idea. If you look at on that theme, you look at the Japanese war against China, where they killed up to 20 million Chinese. There was constant rape and butchery. You saw this with the Germans against the Soviets against the Germans. So we in the West think that butchery, slaughter, are aberrations. For most of history, that's what war was butchery and slaughter, and it remained, especially under what we call liberation ideology, was that the colonists needed to be murdered, massacred, and butchered. So this is where the terrorism comes in. Just want to share with you anecdotally. I remember I was a kid reading Life magazine, and I saw an article on a terrorist attack in an American officers club in Saigon. And in the picture, there was an 11-year-old girl on the ground, bloodied by this terrorist attack. I was 11. I thought to myself, why are they killing an 11-year-old girl? I just didn't understand. If they want to get the Americans out, why bomb the officers club and slaughter families and children? I actually began researching this, without the internet as much as I could. And that's when I discovered it's just not a war against the American military. It's a war against any American living in Vietnam, right, who's understood to be the enemy by their mere presence. Now, so from a liberation perspective, any non-Arab living in this region, in Palestine, is committing an act of aggression. Children, women, men, and therefore are valid targets under liberation ideology. And that's why the PLO attacks civilian targets, because civilian targets are not exempt. It's not a war of army against army. It's a war to eradicate a colonial occupation. Right? From the Jewish side, it's not a colony. It's not some world power sent in colonists like England sent to North America, or the French sent to Vietnam, or the French sent to Algeria. The Jews who came here were not, as it were, agents of a foreign power, but refugees from foreign powers. So this idea that Jews were colonists in the normal sense of the word is simply inapplicable. What the Arabs say is they're colonists of Western culture. They brought Western culture into an Arab area, and therefore it's not so much a colonization of, let's say, England or Russia, but rather the West in general. But that implies that the West in general wanted the Jews to move there to infect Arab culture with Western culture. Of course, that never happened. Jews were fleeing from Western culture in their mind. Now, I think history will bear out that the Jews were not colonists, but remember, when you have an ideology like liberation ideology, these nuances are not respected. If you're a so-called foreigner living in an area like Arab Palestine, you are by definition a colonialist. And an ideologue cannot be talked out of it. I've tried to talk to people, and they just have an ideological orientation. If you're not an Arab, you are a colonist, and therefore you should be massacred, slaughtered, destroyed. Okay. Just a couple more things I will add on top of this liberation theology, liberation ideology, an Islamic idea, and you'll find it in the Hamas charter. By the way, if you just look at Hamas ideology and type in Atlantic magazine, soon after October 7th, there was a really good article in Atlantic magazine, Hamas ideology, Atlantic magazine. It details all of this. When you think of a mission statement, like a preamble to the Constitution, where the country says, we the people of the United States, if you look at the Hamas charter, the purpose of Hamas, the Islamic resistance organization, is to destroy the state of Israel. That's the only reason Hamas is there, to destroy Israel. That's why they exist. That's why the minute they took over the Gaza Strip, they began shooting rockets. Why? Their reason for existence is to kill Jews. Now, I'm not making this up. Look at their document. It was very much influenced by Nazi ideology. The Jews are not human. They're pigs. They're dogs. And worse, they are there to infect Arab culture with Western secular decadence and its attack on the Islamic desire to rebuild itself. Like they're after a spiritual revival. You'll see this in the Muslim Brotherhood and in Iran, that because of the Western colonization of the Middle East, uh, Islam was weakened by the intrusion of Western ideology. So if you look at the Islamic Revolution, part of it was to destroy any vestige of Western ideas. They haven't been successful about that, obviously, because they're relying on Western ideas. So all of the hatred of the West was poured into hatred of Israel. So that's part of the birth of the Islamic Revolution in Iran was destroy the state of Israel. They've been saying death to Israel since 1979. It's part of the, you might say, the founding ideology of the Islamic State in Iran is the destruction of Israel. Now, I can't think of a modern equivalent other than, let's say, Nazi Germany, where the ideology was destroy the Jews. I can't think of another organization or state that was formed only to destroy another ethnic religious group, or a nation obsessed with destroying another group as a central part of its understanding ideology. So from two sides, from the relatively secular liberation organizations, which were in general secular, where destruction of colonists, slaughter, murder, etc., and from the Islamic side, which had a very similar idea. The Jews are an alien, poisonous, cancerous intrusion, very much like Nazi ideology, and therefore every Jew must be killed. It's the founding ideology of Hamas. By the way, extension, or the entire Western world. They have this somewhat, a dream that Islam will take over the Western world and all infidels will either convert or be slaughtered. That's part of their vision for the future. So other countries are in their sights, but it's all focused at Israel. By the way, Islamic State has something similar, but Islamic State, their focus was on the Shias. Islamic State was a radical Sunni movement. You need to look at the Sunni Shia divide. Islamic State, for them, the devil was the Shias. And that's why after the war in Iraq, it turned into a civil war where the Sunnis were trying to commit genocide against the Shia. Many people don't know this. There were two parts of the Iraq war. One was to defeat Saddam Hussein, and the second was to put down the Sunni insurgents, which was devoted to massacring Shia Iraqis. And that's one reason we stayed, was to put down that genocidal insurgent. The insurgents were not only anti-American, they were anti-Shia. You can go back and look that up. So what happened on October 7th is the extension of the 1948 war. The Jewish state is illegitimate. From a liberation perspective, every, as it were, Jewish colonists should be murdered, destroyed, slaughtered. From an Islamic perspective, Israel is illegitimate, but with a much more kind of Gnostic feel that the Jews are the devil, the Jews are Satan, and there's nothing morally wrong with killing a pig, killing a dog, killing Satan. So people are saying, how could they do this? And the answer is, from their perspective, they're not killing human beings. They're killing Jews. So it's very similar to Nazi ideology. Secondly, a little bit more about October 7th, and we know this from documents that have been retrieved. Hamas was certain, number one, that the incursion into Israel would not end in 2 days. They thought they were going to make it to Beersheba. They thought they were going to make it to Ashkelon and Ashdod. And during that time, Hezbollah would launch. Remember, Hezbollah ended up sending 70,000 rockets into Israel that they would go to war immediately. They knew they were making plans. They didn't coordinate it because they thought the secret of the surprise attack would get out. But Hezbollah had a plan to cut off what's called the Israeli Panhandle, that little part of Israel that goes up toward the Golan, to cut that off at the center and then massacre every Jew in the what they call the Galilee Panhandle and attack Israel with again an overwhelming rocket barrage. By the way, the Hamas truly thought this would happen. And now, why did they film everything? Why did they film the slaughtering, the raping, the cutting of people's throats? They filmed it with GoPros and they put it up. I saw this footage before it was taken down. I can't get that out of my mind. Now, why did they do it? Because remember, because the war is rooted in massacre and butchery, they wanted to inspire Palestinians in Israel, or so we'll say Israeli Arabs, to rise up as well, thinking this would inspire them to say, look, the Jews are not invincible. They are slaughterable. You can go into the Jewish town near you and you can do the same thing. So they thought there would be an internal uprising of Israeli Arabs or Israeli Palestinians within Israel. They thought there would be an attack from the north. They were hoping that Iran might get involved and Israel would be overwhelmed and it's as many as possible of its citizens would simply be massacred. So October 7th was supposed to be October 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, until the Jewish state was brought to its knees. As many of its people to massacred. I don't know what their plan was after that. Whether they actually thought they were going to track down every Jew, but I wouldn't put it beyond them by reading their internal documents. Okay, so Iran congenitally established to destroy Israel and murder Jews. Hamas, at its birth, established to destroy the state of Israel and murder Jews. So when someone says, oh, what are they fighting about over there? Why can't they just get along? You cannot get along with Hamas if you're a Jew. You cannot get along with Iran. There's no middle ground where they can say, okay, we won't kill all of you, we'll just kill half of you. No, they are dedicated to the murder of every Jew and the destruction of the state of Israel. Okay, so to bring us up to now, when Iran showered Israel with those missiles in October of 2024, and I think it was April of 2025, we here in Israel saw, number one, that the defenses here are good but not hermetic. I mean, if every one of those missiles had gotten through, there would be a million dead Israelis. Okay, so thank God for the air defenses. And also, I think we all thought the same thing. If any of those missiles were not a nuclear bomb, just nuclear tipped, a dirty bomb, there'd be hundreds of thousands of people killed. So when we realized that we could be hit by Iranian ballistic missiles, the hundreds that came over in October of 2024, I believe it was April of 2025, two times, there's a sense of they actually might destroy the state of Israel. It was really, it made us feel sick to our stomachs, thinking that they might be able to pull this off if they get a nuclear weapon. So since October 7th, and certainly since the fall of 2024, there's been a plan to take out Iran's nuclear capacity. Now, because of the defanging of Hamas is, they still have the hostages, but they're profoundly weak. They're not a military force to be reckoned with. They can shoot over a few rockets here and there as a nuisance, but they're not a real threat. Astonishingly, Hezbollah has been defanged. Again, they can still cause damage, they can still murder and shoot rockets, but they're not a military organization to be reckoned with. Again, to the astonishment, Syria is no longer a force. The Iranians have been pushed out of Syria. By the way, the Syrians hate the Iranians because they propped up the Assad regime. So think about this moment in history. Hamas has been defanged. Hezbollah has been defanged. The Iranians have been kicked out of Syria. This is the perfect and only moment in history where Israel could launch an air war against Iran. They don't want to conquer Iran. They simply want to destroy Iran's nuclear capacity. Now, people say, well, why don't the Iranians want to compromise? Why don't they want to settle? Okay, and this is very hard for us to understand. Their identity, their very identity, is to destroy the state of Israel. For them to give up their nuclear ambitions is to stop being Iranian, meaning Iranian in the Islamo-fascist sense. They cannot give it up because that's the reason they are there. Hamas can't give it up. If Hamas says, okay, we'll compromise, they are no longer Hamas. If Iran says we'll compromise, they are no longer Iran in the sense of the Islamo-fascist Iran. They would be something else. So the question is, so will Iran compromise? They'll only compromise to buy time to build a nuclear weapon later. They're not going to stop. Same with Hamas. People say ceasefire. What has Hamas said? We will do 1,000 October 7th. This is what they said, not what I'm saying. We'll do 1,000 October 7th until we finally destroy the Israel. It can be next year, in a decade, in a century, in 2 centuries. We will destroy the state of Israel and murder every Jew. That's the Hamas ideology and the Iranian ideology. So the war happening now, back to what it feels like here. Once those missiles made it through last October, if I'm not mistaken, and in April, what we realized here is the threat of nuclear annihilation is real. We just didn't know, you know, if the Israeli military would dare to launch an attack against Iran. So we heard, by the way, we heard Prime Minister Netanyahu in an interview from Channel 12, which are not friends of his, and the woman interviewer is, someone who's pretty hostile. It was really interesting to see this woman sitting across from the table from the Prime Minister. And, I don't know how they felt, but, we who were watching said, oh no, I hope this goes well. She was modestly respectful, and she said, so what happened? And he said, I've been trying to do this my entire political life. I've never been able to get the army, the Mossad, the intelligence services, enough people in the Knesset to do it. He says, I can't act alone. They say he's a fascist dictator. He's not. In fact, the Mossad, the intelligence services, the military, they're like fiefdoms, which means you don't have a commander in chief who can tell them what to do. If they don't like what you want them to do, they simply won't do it. And he said, I've not been able to create consensus to attack Iran until now, this moment when Hamas is defanged, Hezbollah is defanged, Iranians are out of Syria. He says, this is the moment that may never be repeated in history. It has to be now. So he's able to convince the Mossad, what's called the Shin Bet, the General Intelligence Services, the army, of course, and other parts of Israeli defense, that this is the time to do it. Now we have to plan it. So because everybody's finally on board, and probably since October 7th, this is when the Mossad has infiltrated Iran. Tactics and armaments were created. So what you're seeing now is the result of probably since October 7th, the training. By the way, I spoke to an Orthodox Jew and they said, Hashem is protecting Israel. I said, no, I think it's diligent training, military doctrine, creating the right weapons, the valor of the IDF. If God is there, God's inspiring them, but this is not an act of God. This is an act of a military plan planned by brilliant, courageous people who realize if this is not completed, Israel stands the risk of nuclear annihilation. So how do we feel here? I just want to share an analogy. My mother born in 1925. She was 14 when the war in 1940. All the kids were shipped out of London for the first blitz in 1940. She came back at age 16, joined the British Home Guard, and was there for the 1944 blitz. And she told us about the bombing and the V-2 rockets, and 22,000 Londoners were killed in the blitz, about 40,000 English in general. 2 million homes were destroyed or damaged. And I asked my mother, how was it? And she said, we were British. You can't bomb us into submission. What the Germans hoped the British would do to say, the civilian casualties are so great, we'll quit the war. So the British said, we weren't going to quit the war. We were committed to the destruction of Nazi Germany. So the civilians felt themselves to be part of, not separate from, the mission to destroy Nazi Germany. And I remember, I mean, I have so many stories I could tell you, which I won't, of what it meant for her to go to work one day and come home, and the entire city block where her apartment was destroyed by a blockbuster bomb. Um, that was a strange thing. Find another place to live. She met my father during that time, by the way. My father was a soldier in the American military who went over to England to prepare for the invasion of France. My dad was part of that. But she said, we were British, we were resilient. We're not going to say stop fighting because we're getting bombed here. They realized it's part of what it means to fight Nazi Germany. I would venture to say, again, we haven't heard anything to the contrary. There are no demonstrations. There's no anti-government. There's no stop the war movement here. There seems to be what I'll call a grim, resilient, resolved understanding. If we don't see this war till its end, we might be incinerated. That's what the Iranians intend to do, is to incinerate everybody who lives here and maybe Arabs to come in later and repopulate the country. It's an awful feeling. We had a scare this morning. I got the notice on my phone, missiles coming towards South Tel Aviv, Jaffa. That's exactly where we live. A warning, you might get an alert in 15 minutes. Well, the alert came. We go into our reinforced room and we hear thunderous explosions. Now, we don't know if a rocket has landed or if it's an interception. If it's an interception, it was at the last minute because our building shook. Now, it was an interception as far as we know. If it had not been intercepted and if it landed anywhere near us, our building could have been destroyed. And we know that every time we go into our reinforced room, if one of those missiles slips through, because they're targeting our neighborhood. It says South Tel Aviv, Jaffa. They're targeting our neighborhood or our area. And every Israeli goes through it. They target Beersheba, they target Tel Aviv, they target Haifa, as you know. So what does it feel like? It feels like I'm angry. I don't like the idea of people trying to kill me, kill my family. Um, uh, I don't feel, if we don't feel scared. We feel today might be my day. Fear is not going to do anything. It's just kind of like, if that bomb gets through, the bomb gets through. I'm not better than anybody else. It might hit somebody else. It might hit us. So we go in there. Yeah, we don't want to be killed or maimed. But the main thing is we're part of a war. And we have to see this war through because otherwise there's going to be nuclear tipped mass murder here. So we're behind the war. We're behind the government. We hope the war ends soon, but Prime Minister Netanyahu said it could be an extended war. It would be economically devastating. Therefore, what? It could be economically devastating. They hit the Weizmann Institute and destroyed an entire wing of cancer study. They hit a hospital in Beersheba. They are aiming at universities, research centers, and hospitals. We know that. Remember, only 5% get through. If more had gotten through, probably every hospital in Israel would be destroyed and every university destroyed if more had gotten through. Well, that's what they intend to do. So it feels awful to be in someone else's missile sites. We have nothing to do but live through this. It might be a long war. It'll be economically devastating, but as far as we can understand, there's no alternative to destroying the Iranian threat of war. All right, so we have several alerts per day, many per week. Friday we had none during the day; it was until the middle of the night. So, everything is charged. We have all our lamps are now on USB. We have water and so forth in our mamad, in our reinforced room. The first thing Mirab does when the alarm goes off is she puts in our family chat, everybody okay? Is everybody taking cover? And it's just part of our life. We can't imagine anything being different. And we know we have to see the war through. So now and then when I go to a doctor's appointment, dentist appointment, someone else says, oh, Your Hebrew's good, meaning my Hebrew's not so great. And I say, they say, oh, I'm a new immigrant, Oleh Hadas. He said, when did you come? Last June. They say, well, did you come uh, despite the war? Lamrot milchama, amon biglal milchama. We came here because we wanted to be with the Jewish people. They say, ta tzilni. Oh, so you're a Zionist. I said, Kenani tzilni. It's like, oh, you're one of those. I said, yeah, I had a very good Zionist education. So I was in Young Judea, and yeah, so I drank the Kool-Aid when I was 17. Yeah, we had to be here. Plus, our children are here. Our two daughters, my son Levi Yitzchak up in Sfat. And if I can talk to someone who gets it, I said, this is the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem in 586, the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70. It's 1939 in Europe. It's 1948. There's a few moments in Jewish history that are indelibly marked into our history. This is one of them. And as I've said to you, when we were here in December, January 23, 24, and I was standing in that lemon field, and I suddenly had the sense of, this is an epic. This is an era. This is one of those times in Jewish history that 100, 200 years from now are going to be remembered like 586, like 70, like 1939, like 1948. What did we do from October 7th until this thing wraps up? It's going to define the future of Israel, the future of Judaism, and we believe the future of the Middle East. So that's when I had that sense of kind of a mystical, deeply spiritual apprehension. We have to be here. We have to go through this with Israelis. I have to become an Israeli. Mirav needs to get home. So that happened on January 3rd, 2024. I called Mirav from the lemon field. I said, how soon can you get us here? She says, give me 5 months. And that's what we did. So in any case, so that's, I want to give some background, what it feels like here, and especially how long this war is going to go on. I'll end with this. The person kept saying to Netanyahu, so how long is it going to last? He says, as long as it takes. She says, no, really. She wanted a scoop. 2 weeks, 3 weeks. He says, as long as it takes. She says, you mean it might be a extended war? He says, as long as it takes. I don't have anything else to say to you, as long as it takes. What's Trump going to do? He says, I don't know. She said, are the Americans going to join us? And I was very clear. We told the Americans we're doing this. We didn't ask them, because the United States is not facing nuclear annihilation. We are. So I would love to have the American blessing. We're not asking for it. We have it. She says, are the Americans going to join in? He says, President Trump is president of the United States of America. He'll do his best for the United States. We hope it aligns with our interests. It might not. But we have to do this for our survival. Some people are writing that Israel has, in a sense, come of age. We don't have to wait for the Americans to help us. We have to do this ourselves, whether the Americans want or not. Now, people hope that Trump will allow Israel to use these, bunker busting bombs that could, get down into the nuclear reactor in full door. We hope. He might not. And I'm an American, so I have an opinion as an American. But the sense is here is we love America to get involved, but America has to do what's right for America. We have to do this ourselves. And this has been, people have been real ever since Trump said, give me 2 weeks or whatever. We realized, oh, so they might not help. And when we saw the interview on Thursday, probably the whole country was watching it. We thought, we're in this alone, but not with dread. We said, okay, so we're in this alone. Kind of makes sense. It's our future. And America's a good friend, and they send us arms and moral support. And back in the attacks in the missile attacks, they certainly help intercept a lot of missiles. That's a different thing from actually attacking another country. Defending Israel, which America did in a valiant and profound way, is different from attacking another country, and Trump knows the difference. So we realized, okay, so he'll defend us, but he won't help us attack. He has to do what's good for America. We'll do what's good for us. So that's my report to you, a little bit of the background, what's happening here, how we understand things, and basically the sense we have to see this through. So what can you do? Every chance you get when someone says genocide, you say, give me the facts, figures, numbers, tell me you got your information, right? Anytime someone says something, don't argue, say, show me where you got your information. And remember, the ideologues, you're not going to change their mind. But there are people who just don't know, and they never had explained to them. It's not a squabble. Your next door neighbors fighting with each other. It's founded on a desire to destroy the state of Israel. People need to know that. It's not America where there's some kind of a war that can be resolved with compromise. Nazi Germany didn't surrender until Hitler was dead. Japan didn't surrender until the emperor overrode his military. The Japanese military were training women and girls to fight with broomsticks to fight the American invasion. They were willing to have every Japanese dead rather than surrender to the Americans. That's what the enemy is here. Americans don't understand this. They think that there's something that they're fighting over they could just compromise about. So I would love you to be able to say to people, do you understand what this war is about? And show them, take on your phone, show them the Hamas charter. Find that article from Atlantic Magazine. Show people, right? And, kind of get their eyes. They want to destroy the state of Israel. They say, well, Israel this, Israel that. Say, I'm not trying to convince you that Israel should exist. If you don't want Israel to exist, you're probably happy with this. But Israelis want to exist. That's rational. You don't want Israelis to exist, so don't want Israelis to exist. Israelis do want to exist. So you need to know this is not a squabble. This is an existential war for survival. And when I look at the post of people, they don't get it. So every chance you get, make sure you communicate. It's an existential war for survival. It's not a squabble. It's not about settlements on the West Bank. They want to destroy all of Israel. They want Haifa, Tel Aviv, Beersheba, not liberate the West Bank. They want every Jew in the state of Israel dead, preferably through massacre and butchery. Nuclear death would be acceptable. Hamas would prefer to butcher, but the main thing is, in the end, every Jew here is dead. Okay, that's what we're facing. That's what it feels like. From the home front in America, make the case. And once this is over, come here as tourists and spend a lot of money. Fill up the hotels. Just, make the Israeli economy buoyant. The economy is doing okay right now. I don't know about how longer this can go on, but it's actually doing pretty well. For you to do whatever you can to lift up the Israeli economy. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why we're here. Is we bought a house in Israel. We're paying Israeli taxes every time we buy food. There's a 17% tax on everything. We're happily paying the 17% tax because it's helping support the state of Israel. So my last mention on that is everybody do whatever you can during this time, but especially the propaganda fight. And then after that, come here, visit. Every Israeli will bless you when they hear your American accent.